Picture this. Madrid, summer of 1680. The air is suffocating, thick with the perfume of lavender, rose water, and something else. Something foul. You're standing in the great stone corridors of the Alcazar, Spain's royal palace, when courtiers around you suddenly stiffen. Whispered warnings ripple down the hallway. Her Highness is approaching. Servants scatter. Ladies in waiting frantically spread scented water into the air, though it's hopeless. Then she appears. Princess Margarita Teresa of Spain, just 19 years old. She moves gracefully, jeweled gown trailing across polished stone, but every step she takes is followed by that smell. Rotten fish, damp mildew. A stench so overpowering, it clings to every breath. People avert their eyes. Some bow out of duty. Others turn their heads discreetly. Because here in the most powerful court of Europe, perfume cannot mask the decay of a dynasty. And this isn't just about one unfortunate girl. The odor surrounding her is a symptom of something deeper. Something that has been festering inside Spain's royal bloodline for centuries. A dynasty so obsessed with purity, so determined to keep its power unbroken, that it began to destroy itself from within. This is the story of the Spanish Habsburgs, a tale of power, politics, and the slow, agonizing collapse of a family that once ruled half the known world. At its center is one man, King Carlos II, the last Habsburg king of Spain. A boy born to rule an empire, yet doomed by the very blood that gave him his crown. And to understand his fate, we must begin not with Carlos, but with his sister. From across the chamber, Don Diego Velázquez de Silva, the royal court painter, studies the princess as she glides past. His brush has captured this family for decades, their triumphs, their grandeur, and their decline. To Velázquez's trained eye, the transformation is undeniable. Each generation has carried the same unmistakable stamp: the jutting Habsburg jaw, the swollen lower lip, the pale, fragile skin. Once subtle, these features now dominate. And now something new has emerged: Margarita's strange, incurable odor. No physician can explain it. No bath, no perfume, no potion can erase it. One royal doctor, Luis Mercado, once muttered that it was the price of blood purity. Velázquez remembers those words, because everyone knows what they mean, even if no one dares to speak them aloud. The Habsburgs have married their kin for too long. Uncles to nieces, cousins to cousins. For centuries, the family believed this kept their empire strong, their blood uncontaminated by outsiders. But the price was mounting. What began as a political strategy was now visible in every frail body, every sunken face, every whispered rumor of sickness that echoed through the palace halls. And yet, outside these walls, Spain's enemies were watching. On this day, Princess Margarita is preparing to meet Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the French ambassador and right hand of King Louis XIV. Colbert is shrewd, a man who knows how to weigh weakness like coin. His letters back to Versailles describe Spain's fading glory in meticulous detail. Every stumble, every defect becomes a weapon for France. The steward rushes into the kitchens, demanding remedies from the cooks. Rosemary paste, thyme concoctions, anything to mask the smell. One of the older women shakes her head. Poor child, she whispers, crushing herbs with a heavy hand. It isn't her fault she was born like this. But the truth is harsher. It is her bloodline's fault. And the same curse is written into her younger brother, the boy who will inherit the crown. While Margarita dresses for her audience, 12-year-old Carlos sits in another wing of the palace, hunched over a book. His tutor tries again, patience wearing thin. Your Majesty, one more time. Slowly now. Carlos blinks at the words, but his oversized tongue makes speech clumsy. His jaw too malformed to form sounds clearly. His legs ache with rickets. Seizures strike without warning. He's small for his age, fragile, and far behind other boys in mind and body. Outside the window, Children of nobles run across the gardens, laughing, playing. Carlos watches them with longing. He has never joined them, never could. A common illness that another child would shrug off could kill him. Every day, his body betrays him a little more. And this, the boy who will inherit the mightiest empire in Europe. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, King Philip IV sits with his ministers. His beard is gray now, his body weary from decades of rule. Spain is bleeding, wars with France, rebellions in the colonies, coffers drained. But nothing troubles him more than what comes after him. Your Majesty must consider a marriage for Prince Carlos, urges the Duke of Medina. He is young, yes, but the succession must be secured. Philip strokes his beard, but says nothing. The doctors have whispered the truth in private. His son may never father a child. His fertility is likely broken beyond repair. But what princess in Europe would accept such a match? Still, the king cannot admit this aloud. To do so would be to confess that the dynasty itself is doomed. Instead, he gives the only answer he can. Seek among the royal houses of France, Austria, Portugal. Bring suitable candidates before me. He says nothing of his doubts. Nothing of the guilt that gnaws at him in the quiet hours. That guilt is written in the faces of his children. He married his own niece, Mariana of Austria, believing it prudent, believing it politically wise. And in doing so, he condemned the very bloodline he swore to preserve. Now, he wonders if he has doomed the empire itself. A messenger bursts into the council chamber, breathless. Your Majesty, the audience with the ambassador was interrupted. The princess, she fainted. The courtiers murmur, some crossing themselves. It is not the first time. Everyone knows the truth, but avoids speaking it. Margarita Teresa's health is as fragile as her brother's. Philip rises from his seat, face pale as parchment. Adjourn the meeting, he orders. I must see my daughter. He walks the corridors heavy with the scent of wilted lavender, the smell that has become her curse. Every step echoes the weight of choices made generations ago. He remembers when marrying within the bloodline seemed clever, necessary, the path to strength. But now, looking at his children's broken bodies, he feels only dread. And in the silent library, a physician searches through old manuscripts. He finds the forgotten words of Luis Mercado, warning of the dangers of inbreeding. His fingers tremble as he closes the book. The warnings had been clear for decades. They were ignored. And now, the dynasty is unraveling. Thunder rolls outside. The summer heat gives way to storm clouds that gather above Madrid. It feels like an omen. The Alcazar's gilded walls hide a family collapsing under its own weight. For the people of Spain, these rulers still embody divine right, chosen by God himself. But behind the jeweled crowns and painted portraits lies a truth that can no longer be hidden. The Habsburg bloodline is rotting. And soon, that truth will be laid bare before all of Europe, because Carlos II is growing older. And as he reaches manhood, the survival of Spain's empire will hinge on one question. Can the boy king produce an heir? The fainting spell was hushed up, of course. The court physicians blamed exhaustion, the heat of Madrid, even an ill-fitting corset. But no one outside the family was fooled. Princess Margarita Teresa was not well. And yet, when the letters arrived from Vienna, the mood in the palace shifted. The Emperor Leopold I, head of the Austrian branch of the Habsburgs, had offered marriage to his own niece. It was the perfect match, politically. Spain would bind itself once more to Austria, strengthening the family's grip on Europe. For the emperor, it meant influence over Spain's vast colonies. For King Philip IV, it meant his daughter would be protected, honored as empress. But beneath the fanfare lay a bitter truth. This marriage was another turn of the wheel that had been grinding the dynasty down for centuries. Uncle to niece, cousin to cousin. And now, Margarita, frail and perfumed to mask her affliction, was to be sent like a sacrificial offering across the continent. The court celebrated. Painters sketched wedding scenes, poets composed odes, priests preached sermons about divine providence. But behind closed doors, the royal family whispered, would Margarita survive the journey? Could her fragile body endure pregnancy? Could she carry the line forward when her brother Carlos seemed incapable? On the morning of her departure, the entire court gathered to see her off. Velázquez was there, sketching her final portrait before she left for Vienna. The girl stood proudly, gown glittering with gold thread, but her hands trembled as she held a lace fan. Her father, King Philip, kissed her forehead. His face was lined with grief. He had buried wives, sons, daughters, and he knew in his heart he might never see this child again. The people of Madrid crowded the streets as the carriages rolled out, crying, "Viva la Emperatriz!" Long after the procession had vanished into the dust, the scent of lavender lingered in the air. Some swore they could still smell it days later, like a ghost of the princess who had left them. And in Vienna, Emperor Leopold waited. Another Habsburg wedding, another gamble with fate. Back in Madrid, the boy who would inherit the empire grew weaker. When King Philip IV died in 1665, the crown passed to just a child, Carlos II. The kingdom erupted in ceremonies. Bells rang in every church. Fireworks lit the sky. The boy was carried through the streets, dressed in silks, surrounded by nobles. But the people who cheered him also whispered. They had seen him limp. They had seen his face twisted by the infamous Habsburg jaw. Behind palace walls, the truth was undeniable. Carlos was not just weak, he was gravely unfit. His head was too large for his body. His tongue so swollen, he could barely chew. He drooled constantly, suffered from rickets, seizures, fevers. At 5, he had nearly died from measles. At 6, smallpox scarred him. At 10, he still could not read or write properly. And yet, the priests proclaimed him chosen by God. The dynasty needed him. The empire needed him. So the court began the charade. They hid his infirmities, exaggerated his small triumphs, and prayed he might, by some miracle, survive to adulthood. The regency fell to his mother, Mariana of Austria. Devout, stern, she ruled in her son's name, though the court was divided. Some nobles backed her. Others whispered that France might seize the throne if Carlos died. To strengthen her son's image, Mariana turned to ceremony. Every appearance of the young king was wrapped in gold brocade and incense. He was carried through cathedrals, where choirs sang of his divine destiny. Priests declared his illnesses were trials sent by God. But behind the curtains, the reality was grim. Carlos could not stand for long. He fell into seizures that left him trembling and pale. His tutors despaired at his slow mind. One wrote in frustration, "The king is not a child who learns, but a child who forgets." Still, Europe watched closely. Every falter in Carlos's step was reported to foreign courts. Every rumor of illness spread like wildfire. The fate of an empire seemed to rest on a boy who could barely feed himself. By the 1670s, the question could no longer be delayed. Could Carlos marry and produce an heir? If not, Spain's vast empire would collapse into chaos, fought over by France, Austria, and every power hungry for its colonies. The search began for a bride. France proposed a princess of Bourbon blood. Austria pushed their own candidates. The negotiations dragged for years, every match entangled in politics. Finally, in 1679, a choice was made: Maria Louisa of Orleans, niece of King Louis XIV of France. She was young, lively, beautiful. France celebrated. This was a coup for the Sun King. If Maria bore a child, Spain and France might one day be united under one crown. The wedding was a spectacle. Madrid erupted with festivals. Poems declared that love would conquer frailty, that the union of Bourbon beauty and Habsburg blood would secure Spain's future. But inside the royal chambers, Maria discovered the truth. Carlos, now in his late teens, was a tragic sight. His face drooped, his speech slurred, his body thin and weak. At meals, he choked on food, unable to chew properly. His legs were so bowed he could barely walk without help. His nights were restless, haunted by fits and night terrors. Still, he adored his bride. He followed her like a child, clung to her, showered her with gifts. But the pressure on Maria was crushing. Every night, the court waited, desperate for news of conception. Every morning, physicians whispered, ladies gossiped, ambassadors wrote their reports. The queen is not with child. Month after month, year after year, the union remained barren. Physicians blamed Maria. Superstitious courtiers accused her of witchcraft. But in truth, the problem was clear. Carlos himself was incapable. His body, so warped by generations of inbreeding, could not produce an heir. As the years passed, frustration turned into paranoia. Some claimed Carlos was bewitched. Priests were summoned to perform exorcisms. Holy relics were pressed against his body. Monks prayed for hours beside his bed. The king himself believed it. He muttered of curses, of spells cast upon him at birth. He clung to saints' medals, begged his confessors for absolution. He saw enemies everywhere. France, Austria, even within his own court. But no spell could undo what centuries of intermarriage had wrought. The truth was written in his very blood. By the 1680s, it was clear. Carlos II would never father a child. Spain's future hung in limbo. Would France seize the crown through Maria? Would Austria claim it through blood ties? Or would Spain's empire shatter entirely? Foreign ambassadors sent back chilling reports. One wrote bluntly, "The king is more a corpse than a man. He cannot last." But Carlos did last for decades. Frail, haunted, broken, but alive. And as long as he lived, the great game of Europe remained on hold. Behind the gilded walls of the Alcazar, Spain's last Habsburg king stumbled toward his fate. And with him, the empire stumbled too. It is night in Madrid. The palace corridors are silent except for the shuffle of servants carrying holy water and relics. Behind a heavy wooden door, the young Queen Maria Luisa weeps quietly. Her husband lies nearby, asleep but restless, his breath shallow, his body twitching from another fit. His face, illuminated by candlelight, is both kingly and grotesque, the last, tragic mask of a dynasty that has consumed itself. And as thunder rumbles outside, Europe waits. Because everyone knows this truth. When Carlos dies, the world will change forever. At first, Queen Maria Luisa bore her suffering with grace. She smiled at ceremonies, walked with dignity beside her husband, and tried to play the role demanded of her. But inside she was crumbling. The pressure to produce an heir never ceased. Each month, ladies of the court watched her every move, scrutinizing her appetite, her complexion, even the cut of her gowns. Every rumor of pregnancy sparked wild hope, followed by crushing disappointment. Maria wrote to her family in France of her loneliness. She described her husband with tenderness, but also pity. "The king loves me greatly, but he is weak in body and spirit. I pray each day for strength." Her health began to fail. She grew pale, lost weight, and fainted often. Some said it was nerves, others poison, others the unbearable stress of living beside a man whose every breath was a reminder of Spain's doom. In 1689, after 10 barren years, Maria fell gravely ill with appendicitis. The physicians bled her, dosed her with purgatives, and placed relics on her chest. Nothing worked. She died in agony at just 26. The people of Madrid mourned their beloved queen, but whispers spread. Some said she had been poisoned by Austrian agents. Others blamed French rivals. Still others claimed it was the curse of the Habsburgs, finally devouring its prey. Carlos was inconsolable. He wept openly, collapsed into fits, and spent nights praying at her tomb. He never recovered from her loss. But the dynasty could not pause for grief. Spain still had no heir, and so the search for another queen began. By the 1690s, Carlos was in his 30s, but he seemed older than his years. His hair thinning, his body wasted, his face sallow. Still, marriage was the only hope left for Spain. In 1690, he wed Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German princess chosen, not for beauty or charm, but for her family's reputation for fertility. She had many sisters, all of whom had borne numerous children. Surely, courtiers thought, she could succeed where Maria Luisa had failed. Maria Anna arrived in Madrid with determination. She was intelligent, ambitious, and fiercely political. She quickly gained influence over her husband, positioning herself as his protector and advocate. But the one thing she could not do was give him a child. Years passed. The marriage remained sterile. Rumors swirled again. That Maria Anna was unfaithful, that she used sorcery to remain barren, that the king himself was cursed. Ambassadors reported every detail back to their courts. And through it all, Carlos grew weaker. His skin turned yellow from liver disease. His limbs shook with tremors. His eyesight dimmed. He could barely walk without assistance. His body, riddled with ailments, became a living symbol of his dynasty's decay. By 1698, despair turned into desperation. The court, convinced that the king was bewitched, summoned exorcists. Priests arrived in secret, carrying crucifixes, relics, and holy water. They led Carlos into chapels, laid him on altars, and chanted over him for hours. The rituals were grotesque. At one exorcism, witnesses claimed the king convulsed, foamed at the mouth, and screamed in terror. One priest declared he had expelled hundreds of demons from the king's body. But the sessions only worsened his condition. Carlos emerged pale, trembling, barely able to stand. He clutched at saints' medals, convinced evil forces had ruled his life since birth. And in a way, he was right, though those forces were not demonic, but genetic. By the end of the 1690s, it was obvious. Carlos would die without an heir. The question that haunted Europe was not if, but when. Foreign powers prepared. France, under Louis XIV, wanted his grandson to inherit the Spanish throne, uniting two great empires. Austria demanded the crown pass to another Habsburg. England and the Dutch Republic feared either outcome, knowing it could tip the balance of power and plunge Europe into war. The Spanish court became a nest of intrigue. Factions formed around Maria Anna and her Austrian kin, while others whispered loyalty to France. Every decision, every rumor about the king's health, was a spark that could ignite war. Carlos himself became a shadow, more a symbol than a sovereign. He rarely appeared in public. When he did, crowds were shocked at his skeletal frame and sunken eyes. One ambassador wrote, "The king looks more dead than alive. It is as though the grave walks beside him." In 1700, Carlos's decline accelerated. He suffered seizures, bleeding gums, stomach cramps, and hallucinations. Physicians tried everything: purges, bleeding, exotic remedies from the colonies. Nothing worked. In October, he fell into a coma. When he briefly awoke, he dictated his will. Against his Austrian wife's wishes, he named Philip of Anjou, grandson of Louis XIV, as his heir. It was a final desperate attempt to preserve Spain's empire under a strong protector. On November 1st, 1700, Carlos II died at the age of 38. His body was carried through Madrid in a grand procession, but the people watched in silence. The last of Spain's Habsburg kings was gone. An empire had been ruled by a man who, in truth, had never been strong enough to rule himself. Even in death, Carlos could not escape fascination. Physicians performed an autopsy and recorded their findings in grim detail. They found his body wasted, his intestines rotted, his heart the size of a peppercorn. His head, they wrote, was filled with water. To some, it was proof he had been bewitched. To others, it was evidence of divine punishment. But history now knows the truth. Centuries of inbreeding had reduced the mightiest dynasty in Europe to a broken shell of a man. Carlos's death unleashed exactly what Europe had feared: war. France claimed the throne for Philip of Anjou. Austria refused to accept it. England and the Dutch joined the fight to block French expansion. The War of Spanish Succession raged for over a decade, engulfing the continent. Battles were fought from Italy to Flanders, from the seas of the Mediterranean to the colonies in the New World. Hundreds of thousands died. In the end, Spain was shattered. Though Philip of Anjou became king as Philip V, the empire was never the same. The Habsburgs of Spain were gone, extinguished by their own bloodline. Imagine the silent chambers of the royal palace after Carlos's death. The incense has burned out. The priests have gone. Only the echo of footsteps remains. In the chapel, a black-draped coffin rests beneath flickering candles. On its lid lies a crown, not of gold, but of brittle bone, fragile as the dynasty it represents. And so ends the story of the Habsburgs of Spain, a line cursed not by sorcery, but by themselves. A family that believed they were chosen by God, yet undone by their refusal to step outside their own blood. The last king had been more ghost than man, and with his death, an empire fell into chaos. Even after his death, Carlos II refused to vanish from Spain's memory. His ghost lingered in whispers, in legends, in the fear that something unnatural had stalked his reign. Peasants claimed to see his pale figure wandering palace corridors at night, clutching relics, his jaw hanging loose as if begging for words that never came. Priests spoke of the bewitched king, tormented by demons to the very end. Some swore that when his coffin was lowered into the crypt, the candles flickered out, as though the darkness itself rejoiced at his passing. The idea that Carlos was cursed endured for centuries. And in a way, it was true. Not by witches or sorcery, but by a curse more insidious: the obsession of a dynasty with keeping power trapped in its own bloodline. Modern science has stripped away the veil of superstition. Geneticists studying the Habsburgs discovered what courtiers could only guess at. Centuries of inbreeding had doomed their dynasty. Marriages between uncles and nieces, cousins and cousins, had compounded recessive traits. By Carlos's birth, his genetic diversity was so low that he was more inbred than the child of siblings. This explains his skeletal deformities, his infertility, his frail immune system, and his early death. The so-called Habsburg jaw was just the most visible sign of a dynasty consuming itself. The truth was darker than any curse. The Habsburgs had written their own doom with each consanguineous marriage. Carlos's death marked not only the end of a dynasty, but also the end of Spain as Europe's supreme power. The War of Spanish Succession dragged the nation into ruin. Its treasure fleets dwindled, its territory slipped away, and its influence waned. What had once been the empire on which the sun never set became a fractured shadow. Spain remained a kingdom, but never again the colossus of Charles V or Philip II. And so historians look back on Carlos II not only as a man, but as a symbol. He embodied in his fragile body and broken reign the decline of an empire built too high and too fast, weakened from within. But beyond politics and curses, Carlos was a man, a lonely, frightened man, born into a role he never chose. He was mocked as El Hechizado, the Bewitched, yet he believed in God with fervent devotion. He loved his first queen deeply, mourning her to the end. He tried, in his own way, to govern, though his body betrayed him at every step. It is easy to laugh at the Habsburg Joel or to speak of him as a walking corpse, but to do so misses the tragedy. Carlos was the last of his line. carrying the impossible weight of centuries, and he bore it until it crushed him. Even today, those who walk the halls of El Escorial, the vast monastery palace where the Habsburgs are buried, say the air feels heavy. Candles sputter without cause. Doors creak though no wind blows. Some claim Carlos's presence remains strongest there, wandering the crypt where his ancestors lie. They imagine him searching for the faces of kings and emperors, asking them why they gave him a crown when they had already taken his life at birth. Whether ghost or memory, Carlos II lingers, not as a ruler of strength, but as a warning etched into stone. The story of the last Habsburg is not just about Spain. It is about power, pride, and the dangers of believing blood is stronger than all else. Dynasties across history have repeated the same mistake, marrying within, protecting their purity, convinced they were chosen. Yet each time, the blood turned against them. The Habsburgs remind us that no throne, no crown, no empire is immune to collapse. And sometimes, the end comes not with a battle, but with the slow breaking of a single man. Picture again the darkened halls of the royal palace of Madrid. The throne sits empty. The crown rests on a velvet cushion, untouched. Outside, the empire trembles as war drums echo in the distance. And in that silence, you hear the ghost of Carlos II, the last Habsburg, breathing softly, as though he is still waiting for the heir who never came. History calls him the Bewitched King, but perhaps the real enchantment was Spain itself, once mighty, now fading, holding on to a dynasty that had already sealed its fate. Because in the end, Carlos II was not just a cursed king. He was the man who carried an empire's death within his very blood.